We'll go ahead and get started. For this evening, we'll do just a brief check-in, and then we'll have a brief talk on unspeakable joy and unconditioned joy. And then we'll do about a 15-minute sit, and then we'll have conversation. Richard, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. End of semester craziness around these parts. Just trying to wrap up lots of end of year projects and thinking about moving into 2023.
Good.
Dominique, how are you?
I'm good. I just finished teaching a class. I'm hungry, so I will be listening for sure, but will turn off my screen so I could like fix something at the same time.
Sure.
So I nourish myself too.
Great. And you teach on Sunday too, right?
Yeah, I teach a Sangha on Sunday. Would love to see y'all there. Yeah.
Okay. What time is it Sunday?
At 10. So before the talk, there's a Qigong practice.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Nice. Great. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing all right. A bit of a full wingspan sort of week. I'm actually dialing in from Orlando. My wife, Dr. Gabby Kudjawilks, is on a panel with the Conference of National Black Churches today.
Okay.
So
I wonder.
yeah, super excited.
I think I was on a some kind of panel or a session as Lakeisha Womack did a Rethinking Church conference maybe last year.
Yes, I think she did that conference.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember. Lots of spirit and gifts in your home. I'll talk just for a little while on the idea of unspeakable and unconditioned joy. And when I think about joy within the Black church, I want to kind of focus my remarks on the legacy of gospel music, a legacy of sacred music within the Black church. And I kind of want to tell a little bit of a story about what I think gospel music has done, some of its significant kinds of interventions into our understanding of the sacred and how that's related to mindfulness and the kind of insight tradition that we're engaging. As many of you know, Thomas Dorsey is considered the father or pioneer of gospel music. And the way we kind of tell the story is that Thomas Dorsey introduces blues rhythms and sensibilities into sacred music. And of course, it did cause lots of controversy, lots of hand wringing. Some of the best known gospel artists we think of today were literally kind of run out of many Baptist churches. Edward Boder, who was a senior choir director at Pilgrim Baptist Church at the time, sincerely asked the question, how can something that's jazzy give religious feeling? So there really was a sense that this wasn't a trivial change, but rather there was something at stake in the experience of the sacred. What I think is important is that part of the story that doesn't get talked about is that at the time, sacred music often pretty much talked about God as what we call transcendent. The lyrics that would talk about lead me to the light or lead me home. What Thomas Dorsey does in giving it this blues sensibility is he brings God near. Right? He brings God into our personal experiences. So in his famous work, Precious Lord, it's Precious Lord, take my hand. It's linger near. It's hear me cry. And this song was written after the death of his wife and the infant. And one of the great consequences of Thomas Dorsey's intervention and the rise of what we call gospel blues is it increases the range of human experiences that can be embraced and understood as sacred and as a part of our spiritual lives. So this is deeply complementary to one aspect of practicing mindfulness, which is to move away from compartmentalizing our lives, right? Taking one aspect of our lives and saying that's spiritual and the rest of it is somehow not spiritual. If I were to use the language of the Insight tradition, part of what the legacy of gospel music does is it allows us to engage what we call 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. A few other examples I just want to share. Kurt Carr and the Tri-City Singers has a song that actually talks about depression. The lyrics speak of, I almost let go. I felt like I couldn't take life anymore. My problems had me bound. Depression weighed me down. But God held me close so I wouldn't let go. And so if we think about this connection that we talk about in mindfulness, about not grasping onto experiences, but not imposing us or a certain kind of framework on experiences. And here we have a tradition that often speaks about being kept by God. Okay? Again, it's a shift from trying to hold on to something, okay? Rather it's being grounded in something. So one of the central themes regarding joy within the Black church is gratitude, or specifically a posture of thankfulness. So thankfulness is often the language that is used. One of the great songs of the gospel music tradition, simply called Thank You. Walter Hawkins and the Love Alive Choir. The lyrics talk about tragedies are commonplace, all kinds of diseases. People can't get enough pay. As for me, all I can say is thank you, Lord, for all you've done for me. Folks without homes living out in the streets, and the drug habits some say they just can't beat. Muggers and robbers, no place seems safe, but you've been my protection every step of the way. So again, I just want to kind of emphasize here the ways in which gospel music draws into our experience of the sacred, of the spiritual life, all of the experiences, both good and bad, but also continues to cultivate a deep sense of thankfulness, a deep sense of gratitude. And in the Insight tradition, the practice of gratitude is critical to cultivating joy. Another crucial distinction within the Insight tradition, we also find within the work of Shirley Caesar, one of her most famous songs, This Joy I Have. And she talks about this joy I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world didn't take it away. And if you listen to her live version, there's a wonderful moment where she talks about this joy I have, the robber who breaks into my home can't take it away. It can't be repossessed, right? As my home or my automobile. She goes into all these very practical examples of things that we enjoy in life, but that we can always lose. And this also has deep resonances within what we call a classical tradition of the Christian faith, stretching all the way back to St. Augustine in the 3rd century, which makes a real distinction between caritas, which is the love of the sacred, and cupiditas, which is temporal love. And this isn't good or bad, right? He says we should enjoy the things of this world, but he was very clear that because they can be lost, it brings about suffering. In the Insight tradition, there's a distinction between what we call pamoja, and sukha. Pamoja is a happiness that is of the senses, the experience of taste, the experience of compliments, different forms of happiness that we experience in relationships. And this can also be a source of awakening. It can introduce us into what we call wholesome mind states. It can give us a sense of what we love, the experience of goodness, of beauty. But again, these are all temporary, and they can be experiences of things that we can lose. And sukha is what the Insight tradition calls unconditioned happiness. And unconditioned happiness is a happiness that emerges from our natural presence. It is an inner freedom and experiencing of who we really are. It is when we are happy being at home with ourselves. It is described as a natural radiance of being, an awakeness, and an openness. And one of the important things about this form of joy, and here Jack Kornfield I find to be very insightful. He says, in joy, we are not afraid of pleasure. We do not mistakenly believe it is disloyal to the suffering of the world to honor the happiness we have been given. Joy gladdens the heart. We can be joyful for people we love, for moments of goodness, for sunlight and trees, and for the very breath within our lungs. We can rejoice in life itself, in being alive. Howard Thurman, one of the great mystics of the Black church, also has the same insight into the nature of joy. He says this, and this to me is one of the very interesting characteristics of the dynamics of joy. It does not mean that a person has not had a broken heart. It does not mean that a person has not suffered, but it does mean that they've been able to discover that joy and sorrow, or joy and pain, are two sides of the same coin. That when love meets pain, it becomes compassion. When love meets happiness, it becomes joy. The joy is the expression of a liberated and awakened heart. And I believe that within the Black church, this understanding of joy that is not reduced to something that the world can give or take away, but rather it is the experience of the sacred. It is something that, to use the language of the church, it holdeth the reins. Right? It holds the reins of who we are in our inner selves. Which quote, Dominic? I'm sorry.
Sorry, the last one you just.
Yeah, I'll share it with you. So I want to share a poem from Barbara Holmes. And I think it really captures this sense of joy within the Black church, but also it captures why I think the practice of mindfulness is valuable. She says this, joy unspeakable is not silent. It moans, hums, and bends to the rhythm of a dancing universe, is a fractal of transcendent hope, a hologram of God's heart, a black hole of a knowing. For our free African ancestors, joy unspeakable is drum talk. It invites the spirits to dance with us and to tell tall tales by the fire. For the desert mothers and fathers, joy unspeakable is respite from the maddening crowds and freedom from church as usual. For enslaved Africans during the Middle Passage, joy unspeakable is the surprise of living one more day and the freeing embrace of death, chosen and imposed. For Africans in bondage in the Americas, joy unspeakable is that moment of mystical encounter when God tiptoes into the hush harbor, testifies about divine suffering, and whispers in our ears, don't forget I taught you how to fly on a wing and a prayer. When you're ready, let's go. Joy unspeakable is how I got over after swimming safely to the other shore of a swollen Ohio River when you know that you can't swim. It is a blessed assurance that Canada is far, but not that far. For Africana members of the invisible institution, the emerging Black church, joy unspeakable is practicing freedom while chains still chafe, singing deliverance while Jim Crow stalks, trusting God's healing in home remedies, prayers, kerosene, and cow patty tea. For the tap dancing, boogie woogie, rap, rock, blues griots who also hear God, joy unspeakable is that space, time, joy continuum thing that dares us to play and pray in all of the aspects of life. It is a belief that the phrase, the art of living, means exactly what it says. Joy unspeakable is both fire and cloud, the unlikely merger of trance and high-tech lives, ecstatic songs and a jazz repertoire. Joy unspeakable is a symphony of incongruities, of faces aglow and hearts on fire, and the wonder of surviving together. I want to close with sharing a story about how I came to appreciate this tradition of thankfulness that I find within the Black church, and why I think this practice of gratitude and mindfulness is important. Some of you may remember the movie Soul Food. It was out, gosh, I don't want to date myself, but it's been some years now. But in the movie, there is an image of, I think it's an uncle, but there's a gentleman within this family that lives upstairs. And there are times when the family members kind of bring food to the uncle and they kind of slide it underneath the door. And it's never really stated exactly why he stays in the room. It's kind of inferred. And at the very end of the movie, after the family has endured lots of trials and tribulations, there's this moment when the uncle kind of walks down the stairs and joins them at the table. I remember the image just hit me really hard for some reason. I couldn't remember why. I couldn't figure out why it was bothering me. And as I was driving home, I began to think about my Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol, when I was growing up, lived with my grandmother. I never knew Aunt Carol to have a job. Aunt Carol was kind of just there. Right? And every now and then there would be some kind of emotional outburst. My grandmother, my father wouldn't necessarily respond to it. It was kind of normalized. And by the time I got home, I called my father and I said, Dad, can I ask you something? He said, sure. I said, was Aunt Carol mentally ill? Or does she suffer from mental illness? And there was this long silence. Right? Finally, my father said, well, son, back then we didn't know about such things. We just took care of people. And in that moment, it was such a heavy moment because I thought, my God, one, if she could have gotten the care, right, what might her life have been like? Right? What kind of possibilities may have been available to her? But then I began thinking about what my father said, because back then we didn't know about such things. So I'm saying to myself, what if the experience of my family was not unique? How many families within the Black community had family members in the home who were suffering from different forms of mental illness? And like my father and my grandmother, they didn't know about such things. They just took care of people. And I began to think about what I would hear growing up in the life of the church. People would say, I thank God for waking me up this morning, clothed in my right mind. And those words now began to take on a different kind of meaning, precisely because this is coming from people who are living with this day in and day out and caring for people in deep ways. And so this tradition of thankfulness, right, about mindfulness, right, I see very much as complementary. Right? That this practice of gratitude and thankfulness as really a central avenue into the cultivation of joy, of sukha, right? And unconditioned joy. Thank you. We're going to do about a 15-minute sit. If you would come into a posture that is comfortable for you, in which you feel both alert and relaxed. Allow your shoulders to relax. Feel yourself grounded and supported by the floor or the earth. We're going to start just with a brief body scan. We'll just move our attention and awareness through our body. We're going to invite each area to soften and to release any tension that we're experiencing. So first, see if you can allow your face to soften. Your forehead, the eyes, your jaw. Soften down through your neck, shoulders, and your arms. Continue down through your torso, seeing if you can soften your chest and belly. See if you can release any tension in your hips. Allow your attention to rest on your thighs, your knees, and the lower legs. Allow your awareness to move through your ankles, feet, and toes. Allow your awareness to just focus on your entire body. Allow your entire body to relax. Taking a few deep breaths. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. And just letting your breath find its own rhythm. you find yourself trying to control your breath, see if you can relax a little bit more and just be with your breath. Being with it as it moves through you. Now bring something to mind that brings you joy. Something that brings you contentment, a feeling of well-being. It may be a favorite memory, an experience, a loved one. Recall a time when you experienced yourself as being well. And notice how you're feeling in your body as you contemplate what brings you joy. Now bring to mind some blessing in your life, someone or something you're grateful for or grateful to. And as you experience this gratefulness, just silently say to yourself, thank you. As you continue to dwell in gratefulness, open open ourselves to the fact that we are alive. Feel life as it is moving through us. Experience the gratefulness for the breath that is sustaining us and keeping us alive. For all of the things happening in our body that we are not aware of, but that sustain our very life. As we come to the end of our practice, slowly open our eyes. Let us be grateful for the ability to be present to one another. So now is our time for conversation. Anything coming up for anyone?
Yeah. I'm having so many technical issues today. But yeah, I think for me, it's just beautiful to hear how you are connecting the two practices or beliefs, and just reminded of like specifically gospel music being this tune that can really like amplify this joy and hope. And it just strengthens you and just gives you this sense of like, yeah, I've been through my 10,000 sorrows, but also there are some joys, the 10,000 joys. And it also reminds me of the collective sorrows and the collective joys that together we are really interconnected, and we can come together to really help each other release and rejoice. So I do appreciate this reminder.
Thank you. I love how you frame that, this release and rejoice. Thank you.
I can share a couple quick things. The first thing that came to mind when you talked about 10,000 sorrows and 10,000 joys. In my kind of faith context, we grew up saying, if I had 10,000 tongues, I couldn't say thank you enough. And so that kind of sense of gratitude emerged from me there. And then secondly, just being very, very honest. I spend so much of my waking life thoroughly discontent with the ugliness and ravages of, what Bell Hooks calls our white heteropatriarchal capitalist, every other fitting description we can talk about this system. And all of that remaining true, a part of what this breathing and unconditioned joy is helping me tap into is that revolution and upheaval and turning my interior world upside down for joy. And it's such a incommunicable blessing to be here with you all. It truly is. I'm gonna go back on mute now. I just want to just
Thank you. Andrew, you're really kind of capturing sometimes, especially in doing activist work. Sometimes we can think about the interior as kind of the luxury, but it's so critical to maintaining, right, the kind of exterior work. And just, if we don't attend to it, just the ways in which the powers of the world can become so coercive, right, of the spirit. And you also brought to mind Charles Adams. I think that there was a video of Charles Adams circulating on social media maybe about a month or so ago of his famous sermon. Mentions 10,000 tongues, and he goes through all the different languages.
Right.
And I was so excited to see that come back. I don't know who posted it or how it happened, but it was good to hear his voice.
I was really impressed with the understanding of joy and happiness in the context of community. So often we find ourselves isolated and separated, and we try to journey through our interior feelings by ourselves. But as you said, it is the Black church, the hush harbors, the families that joy is truly shared. And I think that's what's important, is not only that we feel the joy, but that the joy is shared. And I think that many generations are unaware of the historical joy that people have experienced within community, because many of us now find ourselves outside of community. And what brings this to mind is that this young man on Ellen DeGeneres show that was committed suicide. And I often think, would his life been different if he had been connected to a larger community? Yeah. All your illustrations were community or communal oriented, and I think it's very difficult to experience joy and pain outside of community. It's very difficult.
You know, when you mentioned the DJ Twitch, sometimes when your everyday job is to have a certain role in community, sometimes it can be difficult to find a community where you can just be.
Yeah.
So I don't know if, as you're saying, I don't know if that's something that he was able to experience. There's also something interesting, and Dominique may be able to say more about this, but I think there's something interesting happening within this particular tradition as more teachers of color have begun to talk about mindfulness. There really is a recovery of the emphasis on community, on what we call Sangha. And even Jack Kornfield talks about this. He says that when they went overseas to study, they were focusing on being very austere. And they literally kind of just didn't notice that many Buddhist temples were overflowing with joy and song and lots of colors. And, and this is something that is really, there's a kind of an awakening, right, to just how important Sangha is. But a lot of Buddhist traditions that have come up in America, in particular in predominantly white communities, there really wasn't that emphasis. It was very much focused on one's individual awakening, but there wasn't this sense of the refuge, as community as refuge.
Yeah, to add to that, I started the Sangha because I spent a lot of my healing journey and journey towards liberation alone. And I felt like I hit a wall with that. Not only did I feel like I hit a wall with it, but I was beginning to struggle. I isolated, not to
Mhm.
go too much into details, but that isolation was really, it felt like my spirit was leaking.
Mm.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I started speaking up and out where I was starting to feel community as family.
Mm.
Mhm.
And just remembering, I think part of also the like my liberation and my freedom is bound with you all.
Mm.
I realized that it's so much easier to just pack a bag and go up to the mountains and forget it all.
Mm.
But there's this sense of like this missing component
Mhm.
that's part of the collective freedom and liberation.
Mm.
And I think that's what the path of the Bodhisattva is, or what Christ consciousness is just kind of like recognizing that we are in this together and we are helping each other back home, as Ram Dass would say. And it's something so ancestral coming together, this
Mhm.
celebration. And I'm from the Caribbean background. And like, even when we have our carnivals
Mhm.
and the history of that, there was something more than just, how it is now with the, the dress up and stuff and the whining. It's deeper than that. It's
Mhm.
coming together to really celebrate our resiliency,
Mhm.
and we're strengthening each other by coming together. And it's something so ancestral about that. So I feel like the Sangha is also giving and paying homage to our ancestors,
Mhm.
how we would come together. We need each other. This whole way of isolation is actually sickening the
Mm.
collective being.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
That reminds me of the New Orleans funeral jazz march, where there's a celebration even in the midst of pain. I think when I first saw it, I goes like, wait a minute, this should be sorrowful and mournful, but
Mhm.
it really was a joy unspeakable that they were celebrating. And I still don't fully understand it, but I certainly appreciate being a part of that culture and tradition.
This is resonating so profoundly. I think about how encircled we are as a people, from the kind of ring shouts that you see in West African traditions to people circling up to rap and cipher, and
Mm.
somebody getting the beat, and then people pop blocking together in
Right.
circles, breakdancing. It like we cultivate a joy, to your point, Dominique, that
Mhm.
when it moves from heart to heart and breast to breast, it actually increases the quality and quotient for all of us. And so,
Mhm.
yes, +1 to all this that we're all saying.
You know, part of what's coming up for me too is in that encircling, there's a spiritual discernment that's operating, right? There's ways in which people are taken hold of by the spirit. But then I've also seen times when a minister was going on too long. And somebody would say, don't grieve the spirit. Stop, right? That this is something you can't manufacture, right?
Mhm.
That there's a limit to technique. And if the spirit is not moving, right, then it's just not moving. There's a certain kind of discernment and obedience that's there. Um,
Mhm.
I also want to just say thank you again for holding this. As I mentioned, the first gathering, there was this like anger towards the church I grew up in, because it's a family church, and I took a lot of things personally. And I recognize that however an individual is, should not sway me from what I'm connected to.
Mhm.
And although I haven't been back in the church for a long time, I will never forget, I recently got a transfer to a new apartment,
Mhm.
and I was just filled with so much tears of joy. And the first song I played was Grateful.
Mhm.
Grateful, grateful, grateful. So it's like, it's still inside of me,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
Right.
I feel really happy about this gathering because I was in a state of confusion, you know, and I'm releasing that anger,
Mhm.
you know, that I had. And it's not so much, it may be with my family, but it shouldn't sway me from the belief I have and I've carried and I grew up with. You know, I can still be open to other practices like mindfulness,
Right.
but still hold it into my heart because it's there. Like, I went straight to that song, so
Right. Right.
it's inside.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now I'm thinking about a playlist just of all the songs that that talk about thankfulness, and now you got my mind going. Oh my gosh, yes, yeah. I think part of the other thing that being in this program, it's given me a way of there's so many aspects of the Black church that are often caricatured, right, in the larger society, or the assumptions about being the Black church being kind of purely otherworldly, et cetera. And this program has given me another kind of angle of vision in order to be able to articulate, a certain kind of depth of joy within the Black church, right? That there's a real depth there. So it's given me this other angle. What about something that I didn't think about in the talk, but when I was preparing, did come across my mind, and that is there are some wrestlings, if you will, in the community about the emphasis on Black joy. The wrestlings around really long-standing ambiguities, right? About how do you balance the kind of cultivation of Black joy, but then there are those who are concerned about whether or not it is actually inhibiting our activism, et cetera. So there's some interesting just conversations happening in community about kind of the meaning of Black joy, what it means to have to live in a society that continues to constrict, right, the possibilities for experiencing Black joy. It's something to consider.
I feel like I have to mention this to get to a point. There are certain things that I am trying to walk away from that's been celebrated in the Black community. And one of them is the strong Black woman. I don't want to be a strong Black woman anymore. I feel like that caused a lot of imbalances. It stripped me from my femininity. And I think that there are certain things that just put me in a box by looking like the strong Black woman. And when I've noticed about like Black joy, sometimes I find myself battling with that, because it's like, yes, there's a Black joy, but then there's this unified joy of all like backgrounds, and I'm coming from a Caribbean background, so there's a lot of Black American culture I don't connect with. So sometimes I don't feel like I fit in, but I'm looked at as Black. And so, you know, there's, for example, like a lot of like classic Black movies I didn't grow up watching, and they'll be like, "You Black, like you," but you don't know my soca songs, like, you know. So, and I get it, like there's a unity here, so I'm trying to like fit into it, but then there's still culture there that I don't resonate with.
Thank you for that. My every now and then my wife is always afraid to mention a movie she hadn't seen. And if it's like something that's like a must, I'm like, okay, we're taking care of this tonight. Like, right? Like, when we first started dating, I forced my wife to go back and watch all the Blaxploitation movies. Like, what do you mean you haven't seen Shaft? How is this even possible? Like, where did you? So I just do like a cultural download. I'm like, here something else you mentioned, Dominic, and that book that Andrew just put in the chat, really good. And I've also been thinking about this practice. I've been thinking about mindfulness as it relates to the kind of effects that that images and representations have on Black people and people of color, and thinking about, you know, the possibilities for this practice, and thinking about, you know, how we often are forced to inhabit, right, certain kinds of images and certain kinds of ways of being in the world, but then also coming to terms with how we may have unconsciously internalized some of them, you know, and thinking about how this practice of awareness can allow us to be more free, right, in not only understanding them, but having more choices, if you will, in terms of relating to them.
One of the, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that comes to mind for me, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, during a time when I don't know if the Dominic, you talked about festivals. There was once something called Freaknik, which was very big in Atlanta, and which was a heavily surveilled, police, and maligned form of Black joy by Black mayors, mind you. And so in response to what you were saying, Dr. Ring, I think there's a class-laden character to surveilling the joy of Black folk who are deemed outside the bounds of politeness in ways that are different from those who are thought to have a certain kind of status. So Black folks who go to Martha's Vineyard, which I happen to do quite frequently, or other places, we you know, police and surveil Black joy there, or in Sag Harbor, Long Island, or, you know, pick your place, like we do when we see Black folk coming together, whom we impose certain assumptions on that may not have the same nickels and coins that more wealthy Black people have. So I think there is something to be attentive to about the policing of Black joy.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. So true.
Because our spirit is powerful. They know. They know we move mountains, all right? So
say it. And I'm wondering, Andrew, too, I'm wondering if you had me thinking about how to develop practices because because I think that's a perfect example, right? There's a certain kind of those class distinctions, right?
Mhm.
And is there a way in which, how can we create spaces where we can become more aware, right? Of when all of a sudden we feel as if somehow or another someone else's joy is somehow bringing down the race, right? Or something. I mean, that's a real. I mean, that takes some doing, right? In terms of leaning into that awareness in terms of what's happening in my body, especially oftentimes when that occurs in the presence of white people, right? Now all of a sudden, sometimes we, and those dynamics get tricky as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
So thank you for that. I know we're over time, but thank you all so much for your time and your presence this evening. And we have one more session next week on the 21st. So I look forward to seeing you there.
All right.
So
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Not everyone.